Hi, my name is Lirina, and today I'm going to read the book 101 Dalmatians Proud to be a Pup on behalf of United Way of Greater Atlanta. This book is written by Ronald. In a warm, cozy house on the edge of London, a group of Dalmatian puppies were playing their favorite game. They called it Cruella de Vil. "This time I want to be Cruella," said a pup. "No, me," cried another. Off to one side was a shy puppy named Missy. She wanted to play, but as usual didn't quite know how, so she sat by herself and watched. The puppies decided who would be Cruella de Vil, then dressed for the parts and started to play. First, they told the story of how Cruella and her helpers, Horace and Jasper, had kidnapped the puppies. Then they acted out their escape. They never tired of the game and played it over and over again. Each version of the story was more fantastic than the last. "I tied Horace and Jasper to the television so everyone could get away," boasted Lucky. Penny said, "I pulled their hats down so they couldn't see. When they chased after us, they bumped their heads on some tree branches and fell off a cliff." "I picked up Cruella with my teeth," Rolly exclaimed. "Then I swung her around my head and sent her flying off into space." Missy, wanting to join in the fun, said, "Did I help too?" "You just watched, the way you always do," said Freckles. "Anyway, you're too quiet to help. You can't even bark." It was true. Missy had never barked, not once in her whole life. "I could if I wanted to," she said in a soft voice. "Really?" said Freckles. "Then show us." Missy took a deep breath, threw her head back, opened her mouth, but it was the same as always. No matter how hard she tried, she couldn't bark. The puppies burst out laughing, but they were interrupted by a voice from across the room. "That's all right," said the voice. "I can't bark either." They turned around, and there was Sergeant Tibbs. Several weeks before, Tibbs had helped them escape from Cruella de Vil. In real life, not in a game. Today, he had come to visit the puppies and their parents, Pongo and Perdita, and their three pets, Roger Radcliffe, Anita Radcliffe, and Nanny the housekeeper. As the puppies greeted Tibbs, Missy studied him thoughtfully. She knew he was brave and kind, but that day there was something else about him that she found a lot more interesting. He was a cat. Missy had never thought much about cats, but as she watched Tibbs, she started to see what wonderful animals they were. They were quiet, they were thoughtful, and they never barked. In other words, they were just like Missy. That's when she had her great idea. Maybe she didn't have to be a Dalmatian after all. Maybe she could be a cat. Missy decided that all she needed was a few lessons, so later that day she went to Tibbs for help. When she told him her idea, Tibbs looked at her in a funny way. "I say, Missy, do you really think this will work?" "Just give me a chance," she said. "Please?" Tibbs finally agreed, and Missy gave him a big lick right on the nose. He came away sputtering. "Well, I can see we've got a lot of work to do. The first thing is that cats never lick others. We only lick ourselves." "That doesn't sound like much fun," she said. "It's not for fun," Tibbs replied. "It's to keep clean." Missy didn't care much about being clean. She did want to be a cat, though, so she began to lick her paws and legs. She tried to lick her tail, too, but first she had to catch it. She chased it around and around, faster and faster. Suddenly, there was a bump, and Missy went tumbling to the floor. She had been so busy trying to catch her tail that she had run into Tibbs, knocking him down. "I'm sorry," she said. "I guess I'm not very good at licking." "Perhaps licking isn't the best way to start," Tibbs said. "Let's try something else that cats enjoy, playing with yarn." Tibbs found a ball of yarn and showed Missy how to hit it back and forth between her paws. But when she did, the ball began to unwind. Soon there was yarn wrapped around everything, including Tibbs. I guess I'm not very good at playing with yarn either, said Missy sadly. Don't worry, Tibbs replied. I know just the thing to try. It's so easy that anyone can do it. Tibbs led Missy to the next room, where Anita was standing by the piano listening to Roger play. Watch this, said Tibbs. He glided over to Anita and began rubbing up against her leg. Smiling, she reached down and stroked his back. Tibbs returned to Missy and said, You see, there's nothing to it. Missy made her way over to Anita and slowly, carefully began rubbing against Anita's leg. Nothing happened, so Missy rubbed some more. A moment later, she heard someone giggling. It was Anita. Roger, she said, look at Missy. She's acting just like Sergeant Tibbs. Roger smiled down at her. Hey there, Missy. Are you turning into a cat? Missy was thrilled. Her plan was working. Roger turned back to the piano and began to sing. Soon he was on his feet, dancing around the room with Anita in his arms. Missy followed along behind, looking for another chance to rub against their legs. Psst, said Sergeant Tibbs from the doorway. Be careful, Missy. Get away from there. Missy hardly even noticed him. Besides, what could possibly go wrong? Wasn't she as graceful as a cat? Just then, Roger paused for a moment. It was the opening Missy had been waiting for. She jumped in next to his leg and began to rub. Everything was perfect, except for one thing. Roger didn't see her, and when he started dancing again, he tripped, grabbed Anita, and the three of them went down in a heap. Roger looked up and saw Missy. Scratching her ears, he said, You're a sweet dog, Missy, but I think you'd better go outside for a while. Roger took Missy into the yard, where Sergeant Tibbs found her in a short while later. There's no use, Tibbs, she said. I'll never be a cat. He smiled sadly. Sorry, lass. You tried your best. Missy laid down beneath a tree and sighed. If she wasn't a cat, what was she? As she stared off into the distance, something caught her eye. Across the street, two men were getting out of a truck holding big, empty bags. They nodded to each other and silently began sneaking towards the house. Missy wondered what they could be doing. Then she saw the sign on the side of their truck. It said Fur Coats Incorporated. This means that the men had come to kidnap the puppies. Missy jumped to her feet and raced around to the back door to warn the others. The door was closed and she couldn't get inside. She tapped at the window, but no one noticed her. Desperate, she looked around for Tibbs. He was nowhere in sight. Meanwhile, the men had reached the house and were peering through a side window. What could she possibly do? As Missy watched the men, she felt a tickle in her stomach. It traveled up to her chest and into her throat, where it changed to a murmur and then to a growl. The growl grew and grew until she couldn't hold it back anymore. It burst from her throat, and before she knew what had happened, she was barking. Nice doggy, said one of the men. He held out his hand, but Missy kept barking. Finally, the man lunged and tried to catch her, but she scampered away, barking louder than ever. The door opened and Roger came outside. Missy, is that you? When the men saw Roger, they raced to their truck and drove off down the street. Missy followed them as far as the curb, still barking. Roger caught up with Missy and gave her a big hug. I didn't know you could bark, he told her, but I'm certainly glad that you did. Pongo, Perdita, Tibbs, and everyone else came running from the house. They gathered around Missy, and she greeted them with a chorus of happy barks. Missy had saved the day. Missy is still quiet and thoughtful, but when the other puppies start a game, they always ask her to play. Her brothers and sisters tell Missy she's a hero, but she knows better. Missy is a Dalmatian, and that's just the way she likes it. The end.